tonight now, a group of men are caught on camera unloading a fire extinguisher on a traffic agent.
The NYPD tells CBS 2 this video is evidence of assault and reckless endangerment. We're told the agent...
So the police really do have their hands full, not just keeping us safe from violent crime, but now they too are under attack from thugs who feel emboldened by our no-consequences justice system. Yet activists insist on blaming police for the existence of crime, which is why there's now an effort to make the city safer by getting rid of cops if they don't all quit before that happens.
NYPD cops are leaving the department at record rates. It comes at a time when the city says major crime overall is down.
But we found that that is not the case.
After spraying a fire extinguisher at an NYPD car, you see the suspect speeding away.
It's not only disrespectful, but it is an attack on the foundation of our city.
We're here at an undisclosed location in Brooklyn to get an exclusive look at the hard work of an elite unit of NYPD detectives. They're going after the toughest criminals in New York City.
2,931 officers either quit or retired last year. The data also shows the NYPD is at its lowest headcount since 1990.
This mass exodus, the result of an aging police force, but also the result of certain laws like bail reform, mixed with what some officers perceive to be an anti-police climate.
We're about to go out with one of the units right now, and they say that these suspects are so dangerous and have so many guns, me and my crew need to put on these bulletproof vests.
Despite assurances from the mayor to hold the individuals accountable, the union for the NYPD tells CBS 2, quote, criminals are emboldened to attack because they believe they won't be held accountable. Our system has sent a dangerous message.
So over here we've got National Guard troops, and then over here we've got New York's finest, and all this extra security, it's doing a lot. In fact, it's doing so much that a local riders group now wants less police in the subway, not more. But what nobody's talking about is that not only could this have the unintended consequence of causing crime to go up if you remove the police from the train, this defund the police attitude still persists among activist groups and lawmakers who are doing everything in their power to make New York's finest fight crime with one arm tied behind their backs, at a time when mass protests spring up at least once a week, when moped gangs roam our streets and parks stealing wallets and cell phones, and when there's so much shoplifting at our stores that Macy's uses braided cable with tripwire alarms to keep North Face jackets and handbags from wandering off and getting sold on Amazon. But if you think gangs of criminals taking over our streets and our stores wasn't bad enough, things are about to get even worse for the city. Because even if activists can't defund the police any more than they already have, they can still wage war against them with constant investigations, even going so far as to persecute officers for tweets. And this reveals the real reason crime is out of control here in New York. The police, they're not allowed to succeed. Every time they arrest someone, that person gets released. If they find a weapon, charges get dropped. And if the work of activists, judges, and officials wasn't bad enough, the NYPD just ended a crime wave of epic proportions. But if activists have their way, this area of the city could revert to the hellhole it was just a couple of weeks ago. Here we are in the New York City subway, which until recently was one of the most dangerous parts of the city, and it was experiencing 6 felonies a day, even after the National Guard rolled in. Yet although the NYPD deserves credit for bringing things under control with a massive push towards busting fare evaders and arresting criminals, activists are upset that these efforts have been successful, and they want to try to police the subway without police. Despite the overwhelming evidence that when cops are allowed to be cops, things work out pretty well for those of us who aren't criminals.
Now, this is tricky every time we talk about it, so let's take a look at the data. Overall crime was down 5%. The biggest change? A nearly 20% decrease, and that's substantial, in robberies. Now, felony assault is also down by about 8%. Grand larceny is the only crime on the rise, and that's up about 4%. I should have looked at the definition of grand larceny so we could all understand what that is.
So according to the internet, grand larceny here is theft of personal property valued at over $1,000, like an iPhone or a laptop. But in spite of the fact that crime here is down from where it was at the start of the year, there are still people who disagree with the presence of police in the system. And for some reason, the activists who are now complaining about increased police weren't saying anything when crime was through the roof. Yet now, proponents of policing say we're being hit with all the same arguments about how locking up criminals and stopping crime makes society worse for some reason. And they say that activists in this city are so busy looking for the root causes of crime that if a criminal's in the way, they just look over them and try to find the root cause. Because there's a pervasive belief that criminals are not responsible for their actions. Therefore, punishing them is completely unfair. Instead, it's believed that their actions are part of a larger problem. And because of this belief, we're on a wild goose chase for causes of crime that invariably leads back to the police because it's not allowed to lead back to the criminals.
One of the big focuses of the crime crackdown, targeting fare evaders. And police arrested more than 3,300 people for fare evasion, up by 88% compared to last year. Governor Hochul crediting adding more law enforcement into the subway system.
We saw a spike in subway crime in January. We met with the mayor and his team. He sent in more NYPD. I said I can bring in resources, transit police.
So here we have the mayor and the governor teaming up in a way that makes all of us a lot safer when we're down here. By adding police, by adding the army, employing a physical presence, which is apparently too offensive for some elements of our society that needs the police just as much as everybody who agrees with them being here. And you know something, to be quite honest with you, I feel better seeing the uniformed authority figures who are armed in the subway. It makes me think that if something were to go wrong, even though they're not pervasive throughout the entire system, that there would be someone who could respond in the event of an emergency. On top of that, once the police started stepping up their efforts to bust fare evaders, crime in the subway started stabilizing. Many of the people they caught had warrants out for their arrest, happened to be bringing weapons into the subway, and the simple act of stopping somebody for committing a minor crime led to people getting caught on their way to potentially doing something much more serious. But as you're about to see, crime is a problem not just in the subway, but all over town, and the police are so short-staffed, they're basically running around trying to play whack-a-mole, catching up to the crime as it happens over here, and then, oh, it's over here, now we've got to go there. And some of these incidents are so frightening, it makes you wonder how activists can side with the criminals. Yet they are, for some reason. So while the opponents of the NYPD are out looking for the root causes of crime, the police themselves, they're looking for actual crime in buildings like this one right here.
They've been terrorizing the streets of Brooklyn for years with guns and violence.
But tonight, more than a dozen alleged gang members are under arrest.
Countless hours by the Gun Violence Suppression Unit went into the investigation that led to the 85-count indictment and arrests of 15 alleged members of the drenched subset of the 9 Trey Bloods, also known as H.
All right, you know, our streets are dangerous, our subways are dangerous, and this type of thing, gangs living in apartments, wreaking havoc everywhere, it's totally unacceptable. Yes, this is a big city with a lot of people, but if we let the police do their jobs, if we help them, God forbid, then we won't have to have criminals as neighbors who terrorize us in order to make a living for themselves. And look at this, the people who got arrested, they weren't nobodies, and you had 18 different people arrested on some of the worst charges imaginable. And this is what the police are designed to do, find dangerous criminals in the apartments they're hiding in and lock them up. Everybody should be applauding this. Yet for some reason, various elements of our society, various activist groups, some of our leaders, they look at these criminals and they see sad, lost souls who are really well-meaning, and they just had a momentary lapse of judgment 5 or 6 years ago when they joined that gang and remained in it the entire time.
We're about to go out with one of the units right now, and they say that these suspects are so dangerous and have so many guns, me and my crew need to put on these bulletproof vests.
Now look, I understand the police are not perfect. They make mistakes, but as a law-abiding citizen, you've got to pay somebody to put on a bulletproof vest and go out there and stop the bad guys, because if that doesn't happen, the bad guys are going to be coming for the rest of us, and we're not going to be able to live our lives, work, provide for our families. We need police. And yes, we do need to hold them accountable, and they should be wearing body cameras. But at the end of the day, we need a police force that isn't just allowed to stop criminals and arrest them. We need to make sure the officers in that police force are well protected and have the support of society, which they will have with proper oversight and accountability while they protect our rights and do their jobs. And the breakdown happens when those two things aren't happening at the exact same time. And this is part of the reason why civil rights groups bring cases against the NYPD for tactics that they claim are way too harsh. But as you're about to see, sometimes when these reforms happen, they have an effect that nobody anticipates, and they set the city up for disaster in the future, which we're experiencing right now.
Video from earlier shows the large crowd of protesters trying to get inside the museum as workers locked the entrances. No word on how many arrests so far. Right now, there are no reports of serious injuries. We'll stay on top of this.
You know, I don't think peaceful protesters cause this much violence anywhere else in the entire country. Which proves the police aren't just fighting crime underground, in apartments, literally any part part of the city, any public space could quickly turn into a demonstration zone. Now, of course, the situation in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Yes, it deserves attention, but when you realize that half the protesters recently arrested across college campuses weren't even students at those campuses, it reveals that some elements of society are taking something that has a legitimate grievance and using it for anarchy. These movements are being co-opted by people who blend in with the regular protesters. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a police officer. Let's say you've seen the city and various leaders attack your department for using the tactics they taught you when you were in the police academy. How depressing must it be to watch crime get worse, knowing your hands are tied halfway behind your back, especially while you're now being told you can't do things that you know keep you safe and stop crime. And critics say this level of emotional warfare against our police has taken a new and frightening turn for the worst. And not only is it wasting valuable city resources, it is making us less safe at the exact same time, and they say it is 100% on purpose.
Today, looking into NYPD spending.
But much of the questioning focused on some controversial social media posts from members of the department's top brass.
Fox 5's Lynn Schmidt joins us live from the newsroom. Linda.
So, to set the stage here, a recent budget meeting turned into a fight over what certain officers were posting on the internet, of all things. As if our society can't fall any further away from the matters that are most pressing. Here we are worried about what someone said online. But in defense, our leaders point out, rightly so, that these posts were made on an official account, and it shouldn't look like the official stance of the NYPD is political in any way. But that's where things get complicated. The police were responding to criticism of their department by a politician who they think has an anti-police stance. The accusations are that this was a misuse of power, but is that true?
Chief Shell's post reacted to a post from Queens City Council member Tiffany Caban, calling the NYPD's raid at Columbia University a colossal disgrace and a horrifying affront to democracy.
Did you instruct the chief to delete the post?
Speaker Adams, this is exactly what DOI is looking at.
Commissioner, did you instruct the...
So here we have the whole Columbia University situation that happened just a couple of weeks ago. That campus was being totally destroyed, and the campus administrators, they couldn't handle what was going on. They tried negotiating with the student protesters. They couldn't get anywhere with them. And after about a week, they begged the police to come in and save their school, which they did, but it didn't happen without any criticism, because apparently the way the police went about removing protesters wasn't gentle enough for their critics. But before we get into what the chief of patrol actually said, you've got to understand these protests, this is still happening at various schools. This is a citywide movement that has not stopped. And critics of the politicians involved in this say that their comments embolden those who are a dangerous element to our society.
Chief Shell responded, "I started to read this garbage and quickly realized this is coming from a person who hates our city." He then goes on to say, "Remember, everyone, if you want change, seek the change you want by getting involved. Then you know what to do."
That seems to be conveying...
So what you have here is a situation where a politician had political criticisms of the NYPD, and they responded with a political criticism of their own. Should a political opinion have come from a government account that is for the police? Maybe not. But would that have mattered? Would there have been any less outrage or any less of a call for an investigation? And isn't the real issue here whether or not it's okay to destroy property that's not yours and to ruin the lives of other students that have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to attend that university and didn't end up getting a graduation? Not to mention possibly injuring students, teachers, and the police themselves? And are we really to expect that officers remain completely opinionless?
Chief Shell is accused of violating city law by using city resources, an official NYPD X account, for political purposes to suggest voters vote Caban out of office.
Do you feel that post was appropriate?
Again, you're gonna...
All right, I understand why our elected officials are circling the wagons. They're protecting each other. I understand that it makes sense, and they don't like being attacked by a department that is supposed to be politically agnostic. But watching this whole thing transpire makes it look like the chief would be in trouble no matter how he said what he said. Just thinking what he thought was the sin that he had committed. And while at the same time, we certainly don't want people being intimidated by the police via online threats or something perceived as an online threat, we also don't want the protesters to be emboldened by language from political leaders that makes it sound like their cause of destroying their own own property and putting lives at risk is okay. But here's where things get a little bit tricky. Let's say you're the fire department. Are you allowed to have a political disagreement with somebody who encourages the starting of more fires? And if you're a police officer, are you allowed to have a political disagreement with somebody whose platform is to encourage the type of crime you're supposed to be stopping? That's the real question here. And is it possible to be politically neutral when those who are criticizing you seem to want more of the thing your department exists to stand against? And while our elected officials are right to want to hold the police accountable, critics say that this looks like a witch hunt, which is completely unjustified. After all, this is just a tweet on social media in response to another tweet. How many public hearings do we really need to have over something like this when the city is full of crime? And when right now criminals could be plotting something that is much worse than what somebody happened to say at the other end of their keyboard.
The New York Civil Liberties Union weighing in on the controversy.
The NYPD has the responsibility to enforce the law, not to take sides in political disagreements.
Governor Hochul also reacting today.
This is a local policing issue for the mayor of New York.
Okay, now as I said,
You know, this might sound absolutely ridiculous, but one of the best things to happen to the police force is Mayor Adams. Is he the perfect mayor? No, but he is a 22-year plus veteran of the NYPD. And compared to his progressive predecessor, Mayor Bill de Blasio, the police have things going a little bit better for them. And the governor is also doing a great job of staying out of local issues. And when the police were attacked by asylum seekers in Times Square, she was vehemently against the fact that the DA did not press stronger charges. And when you consider that laws like bail reform, which decriminalized most of the offenses that get repeated over and over again and are just overrunning our city with trained criminals who've got prior experience committing crime, those weren't passed under Mayor Adams or Governor Hochul. Which means that to an extent, the lawless environment that we're currently experiencing is the result of their predecessors. And observers say just as it took time for the pendulum to swing left, so to speak, it's gonna take time for it to swing back the other direction and for there to be any repeal or adjustment of laws that may now be causing problems for everybody. And over the last year, there has been talk of repeal of certain aspects of bail reform, of repeal of certain sanctuary city policies that limit the NYPD's ability to communicate with ICE and get dangerous criminals off the street when the federal government is looking for them. Could these things happen in the near future, or is New York City already too far gone based on how it's being run for those who are in favor of law and order to see any meaningful changes that make the general public safer? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.